March 2nd, 1943, Port Moresby, New Guinea. The jungle ridge glowed orange under a rising sun. Heat pressed down even in the early morning. Mechanics hauled ammunition boxes, their shirts dark with sweat. The smell of avgas mixed with damp earth. On the strip stood Mitchells, but their noses no longer held glass and bomb sights. Now black muzzles jutted forward, streams of 50 caliber Brownings waiting for a convoy. The change had come fast. In Australia, Major Paul Pappy Gunn had torn out bombardier stations and filled noses with guns. What began as improvisation was now doctrine. A B-25 could spit 100 rounds a second. General George Kenny called them the answer to convoys. The test was here. Operation 81. 8 transports, 8 destroyers, 6,900 troops steaming from Rabaul toward Lae. Coast watchers had signaled their departure. Weather hid them on March 3rd. Now, as skies cleared, 5th Air Force prepared to strike. B-17s would go high, B-25 gun noses low. The goal was not just to bomb, but to rake decks, kill gunners, and smash ships at point-blank range. Crews strapped in, pilots checked throttles, navigators spread maps, gunners loaded belts of tracer. Each man knew the plan: fly straight at ships, guns blazing, drop bombs at mast height, and pull out through smoke. Lieutenant Richard Haverland of the 90th Squadron remembered, "If we stopped them, Lae would starve. If we failed, our infantry would pay." Above the mountains, Mitchells droned into formation. Below, rivers glinted like steel. Ahead lay the Bismarck Sea and a column of ships moving south. Japanese officers believed their escorts could hold. They had not yet seen bombers transformed into predators. The axis had shifted. Bombers were no longer clumsy attackers from the sky. With gun noses, they had become ship killers at 50 feet. Within hours, the convoys that carried hope for Lae would discover that the sea was no longer safe. February 28, 1943. Rabaul Harbor swarmed with activity. Troop columns marched toward waiting transports. Cranes swung heavy crates of ammunition, sacks of rice, and barrels of fuel. On decks, officers barked orders. 8 transports prepared to sail. Their names: Kyokusei Maru, Ayo Maru, Taimei Maru, Kembu Maru, Ogawa Maru, Teo Maru, Shinai Maru, and Nichiren Maru. Together they carried 6,900 men of the 51st Division, plus tons of equipment. Around them clustered 8 destroyers, sleek, fast, bristling with guns. The plan, codenamed Operation 81, aimed to reinforce Lae. Japanese high command knew the garrison there was vulnerable. Supplies had to move quickly before Allied pressure cut the line. The convoy would hug northern coasts of New Britain, then cross the Bismarck Sea. If weather held, it would reach Lae in 4 days. From there, troops would unload and march inland to bolster defenses. In Tokyo, staff officers described the mission as routine. They believed daylight attacks could be survived as before. Confidence stemmed from past experience. For over a year, Japanese convoys had dodged high-altitude bombing. B-17s dropped from 10,000 feet, but moving ships escaped. Crews joked that American bombs hit only water. A survivor later recalled, "We watched splashes far behind us. They could not strike a moving target." That assumption shaped Japanese planning. Escorts bristled with Type 96 25mm guns and 13mm machine guns. Commanders trusted that these defenses could repel anything that came close. Destroyers formed the shield: Shirayuki, Arashio, Tokitsukaze, Asashio, Uranami, Yukikaze, Arashio, and Shikinami. Each carried depth charges, torpedoes, and multiple anti-aircraft mounts. Officers drilled their crews, watch the skies, keep formation, protect transports at all cost. By doctrine, the destroyers would weave and fire in unison, creating walls of tracer. Japanese sailors believed discipline and firepower would hold. None had faced the storm of forward-firing 50 calibers waiting at Port Moresby. The convoy slipped out of Rabaul under cover of dusk. Columns of smoke from stacked funnels drifted across the bay. Families waved from shore. Soldiers leaned on rails, rifles slung, unaware they were entering history. Below decks, men crowded in holds. The air grew thick with sweat and kerosene. Some smoked, others wrote letters. A sergeant told comrades, "We will be in Lae soon. Fresh rice, a quick march, then victory." His optimism echoed the mood. To them, the sea was still a safe road. Allied reconnaissance already tracked them. Australian coast watchers hidden on islands relayed reports. Convoy sighted leaving Rabaul, evening 28 February. Radio signals pulsed through static to Port Moresby. Pilots studied maps. Intelligence officers underlined one fact: if this convoy reached Lae, Allied offensives in New Guinea would stall. But the Japanese knew none of this. They steamed south, trusting speed and weather to protect them. March 1st brought heavy clouds. Rain swept across the Solomon Sea. Visibility dropped. For hours, Allied aircraft lost the trail. Convoy commanders took heart. Weather had shielded them before. Officers on Shirayuki reported morale high. One wrote in his log, "Skies favor us. If it holds, Americans cannot find us." But clearing skies lay ahead. Storm cover would not last forever. The fate of thousands hung on hours of sunlight. On transports, soldiers drilled on deck. Officers ordered them to clean rifles, check packs. Discipline masked unease. Rumors spread of heavy Allied air buildups at Port Moresby. Some whispered about new tactics. Few believed them. Most trusted destroyers to fight off any attack. A private later recalled, "We felt secure. The escorts looked powerful. No one feared bombers." In truth, confidence rested on old assumptions. That American planes still dropped from high altitude, inaccurate, distant, clumsy. Japanese doctrine had not accounted for innovation. The convoy carried 6,900 men into a sea watched from the air. They expected bombs from above, not bullets at mast height. They did not imagine bombers diving so low that spray would lash their fuselages. They did not know that noses once made of glass now bristled with 8 heavy guns. The trap was already set. Gun-nosed B-25s waited across the mountains, ready to shred ships and men alike. The central axis tightened. This convoy embodied Japan's belief in supply by sea. If it survived, New Guinea would be reinforced. If it failed, the artery would close. Allied crews prepared to gamble everything on stopping it. Japanese soldiers aboard the transports lit cigarettes, laughed, and wrote home. They did not know that within 2 days, burning oil would cover the water, and their letters would sink unopened. The sea they trusted had become a graveyard in waiting. March 1st, 1943. Damp air hung over the islands north of New Britain. In the jungle on New Britain's southern coast, Australian coast watcher Sub-Lieutenant John Mackenzie sat beside a hidden radio. He watched the horizon through binoculars, funnels, black smoke rising against the gray sky. A convoy, massive, steaming south. He keyed his transmitter. Large group, 8 transports, destroyer escort, southbound from Rabaul. The message crackled across the ether toward Port Moresby. One sentence carried the weight of a campaign. Other coast watchers confirmed. On Umboy Island, Sergeant Bruce Fields counted masts and destroyer wakes. On Goodenough, men logged positions at intervals, updating bearings. These volunteers lived half wild, surviving on coconuts and dried fish, hiding from Japanese patrols. Their radios were lifelines. Each report narrowed the convoy's position. Intelligence officers in Port Moresby drew lines on maps. Red grease pencil circles closed in on the Bismarck Sea. Weather soon turned. Squalls and cloud banks swept across the route. For hours, Allied search planes lost contact. B-24s sent out from Dobadura saw nothing but storm. Frustration ran high. General Kenny had waited months for such a target. If weather shielded it, thousands of Japanese troops would land at Lae unopposed. "We can't let this one slip," he told staff. Every report was collated in urgency. Every hour mattered. Bombers at Moresby were fueled and armed, standing by. RAF reconnaissance flights pressed on. On the morning of March 2nd, squadron leader John Leroux's pilots broke through cloud layers and saw them. A line of ships stretched across the sea, destroyers weaving around fat transports. Photographs clicked in rapid sequence. The first clear images of Operation 81. Frames developed quickly in darkrooms back at base showed 8 transports in column, warships on either flank. The convoy had committed. It was still days from Lae. The trap could be sprung. At 5th Air Force headquarters, tension shifted to action. Kenny leaned over the table map, tracing the convoy's course. Reports estimated 6,900 troops aboard. Staff calculated unloading times at Lae's wharves. If even half arrived, Allied positions in the Owen Stanleys would suffer. But now, weather cleared. The order was given. Hit them with everything. Schedules went out. B-17s at altitude to soften, then low-level strikes by A-20s and gun-nose B-25s. The battle plan crystallized. Everyone in the room knew the risk. Low-level runs meant high losses. But the gun-noses had been built for this. Crews felt the shift. Pilots briefed at dawn on March 2nd, studied reconnaissance prints pinned to walls. sharp black silhouettes of transports and destroyers. Navigators marked approaches, attack altitudes, 200 feet, sometimes lower. Targets, bridges, gun pits, wheelhouses. Gunnery officers repeated instructions: fire first, bomb second. One captain told his men, "Our guns are the key. Kill the gunners, and the bombs will finish it." The room was silent. Everyone understood. The Bismarck Sea was about to test the new doctrine. Meanwhile, aboard the Japanese convoy, life remained deceptively normal. Soldiers crowded decks for air. Some washed clothes, others cooked rice on deck braziers. Officers scanned skies nervously but saw only cloud. A destroyer commander logged, "Weather favors us, enemy absent." They trusted in past luck. Bombs from high altitude had always fallen wide. No one imagined American bombers flying so low that sea spray struck their fuselages. They could not picture noses packed with guns spitting streams of fire before bombs ever left racks. In Port Moresby, the Mitchells waited. Ground crews tightened cowlings, checked gun synchronizers, stacked ammunition cans. Shell casings already lay scattered from test firing. The smell of cordite hung in the air. Pilots climbed ladders into cockpits, strapped in. Engines coughed, then roared alive. Propellers bit the damp morning. Lieutenant Richard Haverland wrote later, "You felt the weight of every round, every gallon. We knew this convoy was it. If we failed, Ley would live." The stakes were drawn in stark lines. Intelligence officers relayed the final word. Convoy sighted, heading south. Expected to cross Allied strike zone by noon. Messages flashed to every group commander. Radios crackled. "Prepare to launch. Target confirmed." Crews glanced at each other, expressions tight. The waiting was over. They would fly within the hour. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea had begun, not with gunfire, but with coast watchers in the jungle and photographs developed in a darkroom. Proof that the enemy was at sea, vulnerable, and within reach. The Axis returned. The Japanese still believed the ocean shielded them. But in reality, radios had betrayed their every move. From lonely islands, hidden men had pulled back the curtain. In the skies above New Guinea, gun-nosed Mitchells stood ready. The convoys that once carried life to Ley were now marked for destruction. March 2nd, 1943, midday sun burned through the last cloud banks over the Bismarck Sea. Below, the Japanese convoy pressed south. 8 transports in column, 8 destroyers weaving protective arcs. Funnels poured black smoke into the sky. From high above, American bombers appeared, silver specks against blue. B-17 flying fortresses, lumbering at 7,000 feet, lined up for attack. Engines droned heavy. Bomb bay doors yawned open. Crews leaned over Norton sights, steadying crosshairs on moving wakes. At 10,000 feet, drift and speed combined into a gambler's throw. Bombs tumbled free, whistles fading as they fell. Japanese lookouts shouted, pointing skyward. Escorts heeled over, transports swerved. Columns of water erupted near bows and sterns. Some bombs hit close, but none struck home. The convoy kept moving. For years, this had been the pattern. High-altitude precision theory failed against ships. Targets maneuvered, gunners fired back with little fear. A Japanese officer recalled, "The bombs splashed far away. We felt no danger." On decks, crews watched explosions plume harmlessly, then returned to their stations. Convoy discipline held, confidence rose. They believed Allied air power was clumsy, inaccurate, wasteful. The myth still lived, but not for long. From their cockpits, B-17 crews cursed. Months of missions had proven the same. Against stationary ports, the bombs worked. Against moving convoys, they rarely hit. Radio calls crackled between formations. Near misses only, no confirmed. Commanders acknowledged, frustration thick. At headquarters, General Kenny's staff marked reports. The pattern was clear. Altitude alone could not stop Operation 81. Something else was needed. Something waiting on the airstrips at Port Moresby, Mitchells with gun noses. The Japanese convoy continued undamaged. Destroyers spat arcs of flak into the sky. Black bursts dotted around the flying fortresses, but too low. At this height, the B-17s were safe. Safe, but ineffective. Below, Japanese sailors jeered. Some raised fists, mocking bombs that struck only waves. A petty officer wrote later, "We laughed. The enemy wasted their effort. We thought we would surely arrive." It was the last moment of confidence they would know. Allied planners understood the sequence. The B-17s were not meant to kill ships outright. They were meant to force maneuver, scatter formations, and soften morale. The real blow would follow. At Port Moresby, low-level squadrons waited for clearance. A-20 Havocs with parafrags, B-25 Mitchells with forward guns. Pilots watched the clock. Word came through. Convoy sighted, position fixed, escorts engaged with B-17s. The order was given. Launch. Engines roared across the strip. Dust swirled in hot air. Mitchells rolled, lifted, and turned east. Inside, crews braced, ammunition cans stacked to the ceiling. Gunners strapped in tight, earphones pressed hard. Pilots steadied hands on throttles. One navigator recalled, "We knew the forts wouldn't sink them. That was our job. Guns first, bombs second." The mission moved from theory to reality. Above the Bismarck Sea, Japanese commanders regrouped. Reports came in. Bomb splashes close, no damage. They radioed encouragement across the convoy. Morale steady, formation intact. Yet on each destroyer bridge, officers scanned the horizon, eyes searching for low glints against the sea. They had heard rumors of American bombers flying low, dangerously low. Few believed it. Doctrine insisted altitude-protected ships. Still, tension crept into every order. Guns swiveled, crews tightened grips. Something was coming. The sky seemed empty for a moment. Only the drone of departing fortresses faded into distance. Then, faint specks appeared low on the horizon. At first, Japanese lookouts mistook them for fighters. Too small, too low for bombers. Then the silhouettes sharpened. Twin engines, broad wings, nose shapes unfamiliar. Not glass, but solid, dark. The alarm spread. Teki bakugeki ki. Enemy bombers inbound at mast height. Every gun opened fire. For Allied crews, the moment had come. Below them stretched the convoy, black dots against blue sea. Wakes curved in panic. Tracer fire arced upward, red and green streaks flashing past cockpits. The Mitchells roared ahead, guns loaded, bomb racks armed. This was the test gun had promised Kenny. Forward guns to silence defenses, skip bombs to finish the kill. Crews gritted teeth, held course, and pushed throttles forward. The Axis returned. High-altitude bombs had failed, but gun noses were different. They did not trust crosshairs miles above. They trusted fire poured straight into decks at 50 feet. Japanese crews, still mocking the fortresses minutes earlier, now faced a wall of lead. Within seconds, the sea lanes they believed safe would turn into killing grounds. The horizon filled with tracers. Red and green threads clawed upward, some snapping past cockpits, others bursting in black puffs. Mitchells held low, engines howling, spray flecking their windscreens as they roared just above the waves. In the nose compartments, gunners clenched grips and pressed triggers. 8 Brownings spoke at once. The sound was a solid roar, like tearing canvas multiplied by thunder. Brass casings clattered on the floor, ankle-deep within seconds. Bullets hammered into Japanese decks. Wooden planks splintered, fuel drums burst, men fell screaming. A gun pit on the destroyer Shirayuki erupted as tracers cut across it, mowing down the crew before they fired more than a burst. The nose guns were doing exactly what Pappy Gun had promised, stripping defenses bare. A pilot wrote later, "You could see them drop. 1 second a man fired, the next he was gone." Behind the streams of fire came bombs. Skip bombing demanded precision and nerve. Pilots dropped at 200 yards, flat to the water. The 500-pounders skipped once, twice, then slammed into hulls. The transport Kyokusei Maru took 2 hits amidships. Flames shot skyward. Smoke poured from shattered holds. Hundreds of troops, trapped below, never escaped. Survivors leapt into burning water. Within minutes, the first transport rolled and sank. Other ships twisted violently, but the Mitchells adjusted. Gunners raked bridges, killing officers at their stations. One Japanese commander reported later, "We could not raise our heads. Bullets fell like rain." The gun noses were more than suppression. They were terror weapons. At mast height, there was no escape. Every corner of every deck was in reach. The destroyers fought back. Type 96 cannons barked, sending arcs of fire across the sea. One shell burst, tore into a Mitchell's wing. Flames trailed, the aircraft wavered, then plunged into the waves. For seconds, it seemed as if the defense might hold. But the next wave of B-25s arrived, guns blazing. They focused on gunners first, then released bombs at point-blank range. A second transport shuddered under explosions, its bow disappearing beneath foam. Convoy formation began to collapse. From above, B-17 crews still circling watched the spectacle. What they had failed to do from thousands of feet, the Mitchells accomplished at 50. Smoke rose in thick columns, oil slicks spread wide. Radio calls confirmed. 2 transports down, others burning. The myth of convoy invulnerability was crumbling before their eyes. Inside the cockpits, vibrations shook every rivet. One pilot recalled, "The ship trembled when we fired all guns. The whole nose glowed red with tracers." Navigators shouted headings over intercoms. Bombardiers, now reduced to loaders, passed fresh ammo cans forward. Every man was engaged. The Mitchell was no longer a bomber in formation. It was a gunship in a knife fight. On Japanese decks, chaos reigned. Survivors dragged wounded below, but fire and smoke filled compartments. Communications broke down. Wheelhouses were riddled with holes. Steering failed. One destroyer swerved wildly, nearly colliding with a transport. Officers screamed orders through megaphones, but few could hear above the storm of bullets. Confidence of the morning was gone. Panic set in. Still, the convoy pressed on. 6 transports remained, 6 destroyers still firing. The battle was not over, but the shock was unmistakable. Japanese crews who had jeered at high-altitude bombs now cowered behind steel plates. The weapon they had dismissed, a medium bomber with a nose full of guns, was tearing their formation apart. The sea had become a killing ground. The central axis held. Bombers had been reinvented. No longer passive bomb droppers, they were predators at mast height. The first passes proved the concept in blood and fire. Gun-nose B-25s could silence decks, land bombs with deadly precision, and turn convoys into wreckage within minutes. For the Japanese, the lesson was written in burning ships. For the Allies, it was vindication. The battle had only begun, but already the outcome had shifted. Columns of smoke rose higher as the afternoon wore on. Flames leapt from 2 sunken transports. Oil slicks spread in dark sheets across the Bismarck Sea. But 6 transports still ran south, destroyers weaving frantically around them. Japanese commanders shouted orders, trying to restore formation. Crews fought fires, patched holes, manned surviving guns. They clung to the belief that speed and discipline might still carry them to Leh. Then the next wave of Mitchells arrived. Engines roared just above the waves, guns already blazing. Tracers poured into bridges and gun pits. On the destroyer Shirayuki, the flagship, gunners fought back desperately. Type 96 cannons spewed fire, streaks of green climbing toward the attackers. But Mitchells concentrated on her decks, chewing through crews in seconds. A 500-pound bomb skipped across the water, struck near her stern, and detonated with a thunderous crack. Fires engulfed the aft section. Ammunition lockers blew apart. Shirayuki slowed, trailing smoke, doomed. Nearby transports were struck in quick succession. Ayomaru took a direct hit amidships. Flames shot skyward. Hundreds of troops, trapped below, had no chance. Survivors spilled over rails, diving into water covered in burning oil. The sea itself seemed alive with fire. Another transport, Teomaru, shuddered as a bomb tore through its bow. Within minutes, it listed heavily, bow sinking, stern rising. Japanese soldiers clung to rigging, only to be swept away as the ship rolled. The Mitchells pressed their advantage. Gun noses ripped across wheelhouses, silencing commanders before they could signal. Machine gun streams cut through lifeboats, fuel drums, and exposed crews. One pilot remembered, "You fired straight into faces. There was no distance. It was us or them." The brutality shocked even veterans, yet the tactic worked. With every run, fewer Japanese guns fired back. Bombs met less resistance. Convoy cohesion disintegrated. Escorts tried to shield the burning transports. The destroyer Tokitsukaze swung wide, laying a smokescreen. But Mitchells burst through the haze, guns hosing her deck. Bombs struck near her engines. She lost power, drifting helplessly. Asashio tried to tow her, but another wave of Allied bombers targeted both. Explosions ripped Asashio's hull. She rolled and sank within sight of comrades. Tokitsukaze followed, her hull breaking in half under repeated strikes. Chaos spread. Ships collided as they dodged bombs. Communications failed. Commanders waved flags and shouted orders, but the noise drowned everything. Survivors recalled scenes of horror. Men running on burning decks, screams drowned by engines, water boiling with fire. One officer later wrote, "It was no longer a convoy. It was disaster without order." B-17s circled high, radioing observations. Their bombs had achieved little, but now they watched the real destruction unfold. Messages back to Port Moresby were stark. Multiple transports aflame, one destroyer sinking, enemy formation collapsing. For the first time, Allied staff dared to believe. The gun-nose doctrine was working beyond expectation. Convoys once immune were crumbling in hours. Japanese sailors realized the nightmare. Survivors described bullets tearing through bulkheads, bodies flung across decks. Flames forced men into the sea, where burning oil claimed more. Destroyers that remained, Yukikaze, Uranami, Shikinami, fought with grim determination, but they too suffered. Hits disabled guns, killed bridge crews. They could no longer protect every transport. One after another, merchantmen went down. By nightfall, 4 transports were gone. Shirayuki lay broken, sinking stern first. Tokitsukaze and Asashio followed. Thousands of men floated in the water, clinging to debris. Searchlights probed the smoke, but attackers had withdrawn to refuel and rearm. The battle was not over. More waves would come at dawn. For Japanese commanders, the truth was undeniable. What had begun as a mission to reinforce Leh had become a fight for survival. The central axis sharpened again. The B-25 gun nose was more than a modification. It was a doctrine that turned sea lanes into killing grounds. Japanese sailors who once mocked American bombing now faced annihilation at point-blank range. Convoys were no longer supply lines. They were moving targets. The day proved it with fire, steel, and blood. Dawn, March 3rd, 1943. Smoke still hung over the Bismarck Sea, drifting in black sheets from the wrecks. Oil fires smoldered through the night. Survivors clung to rafts, their cries carrying across the water. Above them, the rising sun revealed the shattered convoy. 4 transports already gone, destroyers crippled. Yet 4 transports still floated, crowded with men, and 3 destroyers struggled to keep formation. Japanese officers urged speed. Leh was still ahead, if they could endure one more day. But Allied airmen were already climbing into cockpits. The first wave came mid-morning. Mitchells roared low, gunners ready, noses spitting fire. Tracers swept bridges and gun pits. One pilot recalled, "They were still fighting, but slower, weaker. We cut them down in seconds." A 500-pound bomb skipped twice, slammed into Ogawa Maru, and tore her apart. Smoke rose in a column visible for miles. Hundreds of soldiers, trapped below deck, vanished in the blast. Survivors leapt overboard into oil-slick water. Minutes later, Kembu Maru took a direct hit. Flames engulfed her midsection. Ammunition stores cooked off, hurling debris skyward. The explosion rocked nearby ships. Japanese destroyers tried to weave between attackers, but Mitchells ignored them, concentrating on transports. Gun noses cleared decks. Bombs finished the kill. Within an hour, only 2 transports remained. Desperation gripped the escorts. Arashio surged forward to shield the convoy. Her guns barked furiously, arcs of tracer filling the sky. She collided with the crippled Tokitsukaze, locked together in smoke and confusion. Mitchell seized the moment. Streams of .50 caliber fire raked Arashio's deck, cutting down gunners. Skip bombs tore into both hulls. Tokitsukaze sank. Arashio staggered, engines crippled, flames racing along her superstructure. Minutes later, she rolled and slipped beneath the waves. Other destroyers met similar fates. Shirayuki, already burning, finally sank. Asashio followed, broken by repeated attacks. The famed Yukikaze fought on, dodging bombs and rescuing survivors. But she could not shield the transports alone. Allied fighters swept in, strafing lifeboats, killing men in water. Brutality mixed with efficiency. To cruise in the sky, it was war stripped of illusions. The convoy had to die. By afternoon, only Teiyo Maru and Shinai Maru remained afloat. Both were crippled, fires burned unchecked. Mitchells made final passes, gunners spraying every inch of exposed deck. A bomb struck Teiyo Maru's stern, splitting her apart. Shinai Maru took 2 hits, rolled, and went under. In minutes, the last transport was gone. The convoy ceased to exist. From above, Allied crews saw nothing but wreckage, black smoke, orange flames, and thousands of men in the sea. The scale was staggering. Nearly 7,000 troops had sailed from Rabaul. Fewer than half still lived. Only 3 destroyers remained seaworthy, and they carried as many survivors as they could. Radio reports sent back to Port Moresby were blunt. Convoy destroyed, multiple transports sunk, escorts withdrawing north. The victory was complete. Japanese survivors later described the terror. One soldier recalled, "The sea itself was on fire. Bullets struck water around us. We could not breathe for smoke." Officers admitted total defeat. No transport reached Leh. The mission had failed utterly. In Tokyo, staff officers received the news with shock. The supply artery to New Guinea had been cut. The Empire's expansion halted not by fleet action, but by gun-nosed bombers flying at mast height. For Allied crews, exhaustion mingled with triumph. They had lost comrades, aircraft torn apart by flak, crews swallowed by the sea. Yet the cost was accepted. The doctrine had been proven. Gun-nosed Mitchells, once improvised in Australian workshops, had shredded an entire convoy in 2 days. The sea lanes that once carried reinforcements were now traps. The weapon had rewritten the balance of the Pacific War. The central axis stood clear. A bomber transformed into a gunship had annihilated Japan's hope of reinforcement. The convoy that left Rabaul with confidence ended in smoke, fire, and death. From this day forward, Japanese commanders would never again trust daylight convoys. The Bismarck Sea was no longer a route. It was a graveyard. March 4th, 1943. The Bismarck Sea lay choked with wreckage. Oil slicks stretched for miles, reflecting the dawn in broken patterns of flame. Survivors clung to planks, barrels, and overturned lifeboats. Their faces were black with smoke, their uniforms soaked in salt. They had sailed from Rabaul confident, 6,900 men bound for Leh. Now they floated in burning water, abandoned by transports that no longer existed. Around them drifted the hulks of Shirayuki, Asashio, Arashio, Tokitsukaze, proud destroyers reduced to twisted steel. Above the scene, Allied patrols circled. P-38 Lightnings darted overhead, guns loaded. B-25s returned again, though the convoy was already destroyed. Their mission now was grim: deny survivors any chance to regroup. Pilots strafed rafts and clusters of men. Tracers ripped across the water, sending fountains skyward. A sergeant in the 90th Squadron admitted later, "We were told not to let them reach shore. It was brutal, but that was war." The orders were clear. Japanese troops must not reinforce New Guinea. Japanese destroyers tried to rescue as many as possible. Yukikaze, Uranami, and Shikinami crammed decks with survivors. Men packed shoulder to shoulder, wounded, laid in passageways. They dragged sailors from burning water even as Allied aircraft attacked again. One destroyer reported carrying over 1,500 men, more than triple her capacity. But it was not enough. Thousands more floated beyond reach. Many drifted into slicks of burning oil, consumed within minutes. The sea itself seemed to conspire against them. Allied airmen reported grim efficiency. At noon, another Mitchell wave swept the wreck zone. Gun noses cut across lifeboats, bombs dropped into clusters of rafts. Explosions shattered the last hopes of order. From the air, the scene looked apocalyptic. Ships broken, sea aflame, bodies and wreckage tangled. One pilot wrote, "It felt less like battle and more like extermination. We knew no convoy would ever try again." The transformation from bomber to gunship had reached its harsh conclusion. For Japanese soldiers, the ordeal was beyond imagination. A corporal recalled, "We swam all day. Planes came again and again. We tried to hide under wreckage, but bullets found us. At night, sharks took many. We prayed to reach shore, but few survived." Estimates vary, but at least 2,900 men died in those waters. Some historians place the toll higher, noting that rescue ships could not account for thousands unlisted. The sea claimed them without record. On land, Japanese commanders at Leh waited in vain. They prepared docks and unloading parties. Hour after hour passed with no convoy in sight. Then reports came through. All transports sunk, escorts crippled, survivors scattered. Shock rippled through headquarters. Reinforcements would not come. The 51st Division's men, meant to bolster New Guinea's defenses, had been annihilated before they touched shore. A supply artery had been severed by air power alone. Allied staff in Port Moresby received the victory reports with astonishment. General Kenny later described it as the most decisive aerial engagement of the Southwest Pacific. For the first time, an entire convoy had been wiped out solely from the air. Charts showed the sea lanes empty. Plans for further reinforcement by daylight were canceled by Tokyo. The myth of convoy invulnerability, built through 1942, collapsed in 2 days. Gun-nosed B-25s had proven themselves beyond doubt. Crews on the ground absorbed the scale. They counted losses: several Mitchells, a handful of fighters, brave crews who never returned. But compared to the destruction inflicted, the cost seemed bearable. Pilots who survived remembered exhaustion, ringing ears, the smell of cordite that clung to uniforms for days. Yet they also remembered the sight of burning transports, the proof that innovation had worked. Improvised modifications, born in workshops under Pappy Gunn's supervision, had turned into a weapon that crippled an army before it reached battle. The Central Axis echoed stronger than ever. These bombers had not dropped blindly from altitude. They had flown at mast height, poured streams of fire into decks, and finished ships with precision bombs. Convoys were no longer safe. The ocean, once Japan's highway, had become a killing zone. The Bismarck Sea bore witness. 8 transports gone, 4 destroyers sunk, thousands dead. The gun noses had fulfilled their grim purpose. In the days after the battle, Allied intelligence compiled the numbers. 8 transports destroyed, 4 destroyers sunk. More than 2,900 men confirmed dead, thousands more unaccounted for. 3 destroyers limped back to Rabaul with decks jammed with survivors. Reports estimated fewer than half of the original 6,900 troops reached Leh. The reinforcement mission, Operation 81, had ceased to exist. General George Kenney sent his assessment to Washington. He called it the most decisive aerial victory of the Pacific Campaign to date. In his report, he emphasized the innovation. Gun-nose B-25s and skip bombing had been the deciding factor. High-altitude bombs scattered convoys but did not sink ships. Low-level Mitchells silenced guns, dropped bombs with precision, and finished the job. The lesson was clear. Doctrine had changed forever. Staff studies backed him. 5th Air Force analysts compared results. B-17s had dropped hundreds of bombs for only near misses. A-20 Havocs and B-25s, attacking low, had achieved confirmed kills on nearly every run. The mathematics of war had shifted. A squadron of medium bombers, modified in field workshops, had sunk tonnage once considered safe from air power. Engineers in Washington studied the data with urgency. They authorized more gun-nose conversions and accelerated factory production of the B-25G and H models. Japanese records told the other side. Official communiques admitted catastrophic losses. One Rabaul diary read, "Supply delay impossible under current air conditions." Survivors described horror, bullets sweeping decks, bombs tearing ships apart, flames consuming men and water. Commanders concluded that daylight convoys could no longer sail. Tokyo ordered supplies shifted to barges and submarines. Efficiency collapsed. What once took a week by transport would now take months by scattered barge runs, each vulnerable to patrols. Historians later traced the consequences. Starvation gripped Japanese garrisons across New Guinea. At Leh, soldiers received half rations, then quarter. Ammunition dwindled to handfuls. A prisoner told interrogators, "We ate 1 bowl of rice a day. We could not fight with strength." When Allied infantry attacked later in 1943, defenders were weak, undersupplied, already beaten by logistics. The Bismarck Sea had decided their fate before battle lines met. The cost to Allies was not forgotten. Several Mitchells were lost, dozens of airmen killed. Survivors remembered flames engulfing wingmen, wrecks plunging into the sea. Yet the ratio stunned commanders. For a handful of aircraft, an entire division of enemy troops had been erased from the war. Never again would Japanese convoys attempt daylight reinforcement under bomber range. The psychological shock was as powerful as the material loss. Reports from Tokyo revealed disbelief. Admirals debated whether escorts had failed or if Allied weapons had advanced beyond expectation. Some blamed poor weather tactics. Others admitted something new had appeared, bombers transformed into gunships. The phrase American medium bomber gun noses began to circulate in intelligence summaries. What Japanese sailors had first dismissed as crude improvisation now terrified them. Every future voyage carried the shadow of Port Moresby's Mitchells. Allied airmen took pride in the change. Lieutenant Richard Haverland later wrote, "We were no longer just dropping bombs. We were cutting convoys to pieces." His words echoed across squadrons. Men who once doubted their missions now believed in their aircraft. The gun nose had given them confidence. They could see results with their own eyes. Burning transports, shattered destroyers, wreckage covering the sea. Cause and effect were undeniable. At Port Moresby, celebrations were restrained. Crews cleaned guns, patched holes, and prepared for the next mission. Commanders reminded them the war was far from over. Rabaul still bristled with fighters. Leh still held out. But everyone knew the balance had shifted. Sea lanes once open to Japanese reinforcements were now death traps. The weapon that had made the difference was not a battleship or a carrier. It was a medium bomber with a nose full of 50 caliber guns. The Central Axis rang again. Innovation had changed doctrine. The B-25 gun nose, born from field improvisation, had shredded an entire convoy and sealed Japan's fate in New Guinea. Convoys were no longer lifelines. They were invitations to slaughter. The Bismarck Sea had proved it with numbers no one could ignore.